Mr. Speaker, once again this House has come together to hear of yet another egregious tax on transport, pushed out by this Labour government at a time when people across the country are worried about the cost of getting around. On this occasion, the government, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that this is the moment, the opportune time, to cancel the fuel duty freeze the last Conservative government kept for 13 years, protecting hard-working people from paying extra to get to work, to have appointments, to visit friends and families. Conservatives cut this by 5 pence a litre in 2022, the biggest cut ever in fuel duty. 5 pence a litre. And that really helped when the economy was facing headwinds from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Yet under this government, on top of the countless tax rises that they've already shafted us with, we can't even get through 2 years before they decide that the British people need yet another tax rise. And it's a tax rise in a sneaky and stealthy way. Labour are busy deploying their salami tactics. 1 penny in September, the back-to-school tax. 2p in December, the Christmas shopper tax. 2p in March, springtime for taxes. And we shouldn't forget that a 5p litre increase in duty actually means 6p a litre increase because in top of the tax, VAT is added too. In September last year, in this chamber, the Transport Secretary trumpeted, and I quote, that Labour had frozen fuel duty. That is what we have done. Yet we know this is simply not the case. It reminds me of my childhood watching Chris Tarrant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire saying, but we don't want to give you that. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady has said not once, not twice, but 3 times, Mr. Speaker, that tax rises are now coming, and they're coming in September, December and in March next year. With economic growth at a dismal 0%, that's right, 0%, the British people deserve better than underhand taxes swindling them out of the pounds in their pockets. And to pay for what, Mr. Speaker? To pay for more welfare. A tax on every car, every van, every motorbike and every bus. This is a tax on hauliers too, a tax on businesses, a tax on families, a tax on the country over. It is these families, thanks to her government, who will be forking out an extra £156 a year. I give way to my honourable friend.
First of all, can I congratulate the Shadow Minister and the opposition bringing this forward, and it's very important that we do consider this. We're fast approaching a crisis that cannot be circumnavigated. The Shadow Minister agreed that government must consider reopening North Sea production and to produce enough for our needs. If government continues to refuse to play their part to secure the fuel pass, and does the Shadow Minister not agree that fuel duty can and should see the benefit of self-reliance and not dependence on volatile nations, which it is at this very minute?
Quite right.
I cannot agree more with the honourable member. We need to get back to drilling in the North Sea. It's quite clear that when Norway is drilling on one side of the same basin and actually getting the benefit of those jobs, of the tax revenue, it bemuses me as to why we're not doing it here. And my right honourable friend, the member for Surrey East, has consistently said from these benches, as the Shadow Energy Secretary, that's exactly what we should get on and do. I give way on the same point.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and he makes a powerful point around North Sea oil and gas. And party opposite says it won't make any difference to the global price of oil and gas. But billions and billions of pounds in tax will be lost as a result of having no new licences in the oil sea. Those billions could be used to replace the revenues generated by fuel duty. So, in fact, if the government wished it, it could convert those billions into cuts in price at the pump for every single family in the country, including those in rural Beverley and Holden who are suffering today.
My right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point. The government is currently foregoing tax revenue, which is going into the coffers of other treasuries right across Europe and across the world. It's forgoing that revenue. And why? To what end? We'll see if the ministers will actually answer that question as to why they're willing to forgo that. Hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of pounds every year. They could spend it on anything they wanted to, and they're not even going to do it. And he says they're getting.
Order. PPFs are not there to chirp all the way through and give solutions to a problem. I have great confidence in the minister to answer when he comes on.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, for reminding the right honourable member of his role. Indeed, I will give way to my honourable friend.
Does he agree with me that the government's policy fails on its own terms because it says it wants to subscribe to net zero and make us much greener the way we approach our energy consumption, and yet we know that importing LNG from countries like the US causes a multiple in terms of the carbon cost than extracting the stuff in this country within our own territorial sea would do. And therefore, if they're serious about net zero, they will be pumping LNG from the North Sea and not importing it from the US.
The honourable member makes an incredibly important point, and I think he makes it really clearly as well. And he's in agreement with the Committee on Climate Change, who say we're going to have to be using oil and gas well into the second half of this century. So why on earth shouldn't we drill our own at lower cost and bring in those jobs and taxation, and also, obviously, with the environmental benefits of doing it on our own doorstep as well, and doing it under British regulations as well. So we're not going to, this isn't going to be extracted in other countries with lower regulations, lower environmental standards. The best environmental standards in the world exist in our North Sea. And I'll happily give way to the honourable member.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Part of the debate is really around sustainability, and it's around net zero, and obviously honourable colleagues have made a number of interventions already around that, and I understand the Shadow Minister's position. But does he agree with me that actually, whilst we're also focusing on the hiking fuel duty, the government are also increasing the charges on electric vehicle drivers? So it's both sets of drivers that are being hammered by this government who haven't thought through the consequences of their policy.
My honourable friend makes a very interesting point as well at this juncture. It's very clear that the government is also trying to undo the damage that it's done by its own new tax. And actually, it's having to put more money in terms of the electric car grant that it's going to get out from these pay-per-mile schemes, which actually the government previously had said it would not introduce. So the government is actually costing itself more money by imposing a tax. It's quite incredible what the government is up to, whether it comes to the North Sea or whether it comes to taxation policy. And that I will in a moment. The Taxpayers Alliance has said that almost £40,000 of fuel taxes will be paid by the average driver over the course of a lifetime after this tax hike. And it will be a higher proportion of that income if you're in a lower paid job and need a car to get about. And I'll give way on that point to my honourable friend.
I thank the honourable gentleman friend for giving way. Just to make a couple of points, however, and he's talking about how money may be spent from taxation. Just to highlight the point that local authority road maintenance budgets fell from £4 billion in 2006 to £2 billion in 2019, so halved in that 13-year period. And then just to look at inflation, where you see for the Bank of England's data shows from 2006 to 2026, the overall inflation ran at 74%, but fuel inflation was just 58%.
Indeed, and on that second point, obviously the inflation would have been higher overall if the fuel inflation had been higher overall. The honourable member makes an important point about potholes and road maintenance as well. It's interesting that he stood in a manifesto at the last general election which promised an extra 1 million potholes would be filled a year. We saw the figures just a few weeks ago saying that exactly the same number of potholes was filled in the last year as it was in the last year of the last government. So I look forwards to seeing actually his government starting to deliver on any of the pledges it's proposed, and perhaps it could do so a bit more easily if it had that tax revenue coming in from the North Sea, which is what this side of the House would like to see. Now, this is Labour's regressive tax rate. Do we really understand, I think, from the government benches, just how punitive this tax measure is going to be? Of course not. Of course not. How could we, when it feels like I will give way to my honourable friend in just a moment. How could we understand when it's actually rural communities that are going to be hit hardest by this, as it is always with transport? The truth is that the DFT and the Treasury working together are more like watching an episode of Hustle. The con is on, and it's being perpetuated by this Labour government. And I give way to my honourable friend.
I don't friend agree, though, that in large rural constituencies like mine, it's not just constituents having to pay at the pump the additional fuel duty. They pay through everything that they buy, because everything has to be transported into these rural areas or the services that they acquire. So they pay twice, and makes this tax rise doubly regressive.
My right honourable friend raises an incredibly important point. It is not just those who have a car who will be paying for this, although they will be paying the most. It's not just those who rely on a van for their business or work to get around, but it's actually everyone, whether you use the bus or whether you're using just go to the shops. Because the truth is that everything has to be transported by road in this country. This tax rise is going to have huge inflationary pressures right across the board, not just in terms of the individual fuel, whether that's for heating or in today's debate for road transport. But the honourable member is absolutely right. It will play right across the board into so many other areas which are not even being considered, I don't think, by the Treasury at this moment. And I'll happily give way to the honourable member.
All his arguments stand, and that was before the war in Iran. So the Prime Minister stood there on Monday saying the freeze is still in place. Yes, that was before the world has changed literally around us. So does he share my concern that actually this government isn't being reactive and following the change, because there is going to be a big impact and a knock-on? And the Prime Minister is touting this as though it's some new policy brought out that was actually in the budget from last year.
My honourable friend makes an important point about that, and he'll also be aware that when the fuel price goes up, actually the government's VAT revenues from fuel go up at the same time. So the government's actually already seeing hundreds of millions of pounds a year extra in VAT purely from the fact that the price has gone up itself, the underlying price. But my right honourable friend makes another important point, that this is a moment for the government to reconsider. On this side of the House, we opposed this measure at the budget because we thought it was the wrong thing to do to hit working families. But it's doubly the wrong thing to do when prices are also going up internationally. Now, I've already given way to the honourable member, but I'll happily give way to the honourable lady.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that the 53 million is welcome, but calculated out it's about £35 per household, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things? Would he agree that fuel duty should be cut, VAT should be removed, and the North Sea opened up, and that's as well as fertilisers and red diesel, which are impacted heavily as well? We need support out now for people.
The honourable lady raises a really important point. And actually, with those revenues from reopening the North Sea for oil and gas, she raises a number of different areas which that money could be spent on. Well, we've got to open the North Sea, a cost-free alternative, an environmentally positive alternative, in order to get that tax revenue in. And then, obviously, we can look at all sorts of different things that members on all sides of the House would want to spend money on. I'll just make a little bit of progress. We've seen since Labour came into office just how much they've hit transport across the country. Today, and the 5p a litre fuel duty rise is just the latest in those. First of all, they abolished the much-loved £2 fare cap, which this side of the House on buses had pledged at the general election to continue through the entirety of this Parliament. So that side of the House has put bus fares up 50%. They've also jacked up airport business rates by a staggering 295% on average. 295% on average. Now, who's benefited from that? Certainly not passengers, certainly not the airlines, and certainly not British business. And you know what else they've done? They've also raised air passenger duty, with passengers facing a 15% jump in 1 year alone, followed by permanent increases year after year after year of between 3 and 4% just to get on a plane. And you know what else they've done? In the last few weeks, they've actually raised the price of rail cards for the first time since... Maybe they'd like to chunter on this one. Do you remember this one, guys? Nothing from this one. 2013. That's the first time in over 10 years we're seeing rail cards. Senior rail cards, veteran rail cards, young people's rail cards, new taxes on people right across the country, all being raised by this government. A 16% rise, the first time since 2013. And they didn't even know about it because they don't care about young people, about old people, about the people being affected by these tax rises hitting people right across the country from September. And Labour have just introduced a new policy that will leave ferry passengers on the Isle of Wight also facing bigger crossing charges. £30 more per crossing, hitting family holidays in the UK and people just trying to get about their daily lives from the Isle of Wight as well. Labour are stealthily on side of this. Their tourist tax absolutely hammering working Britain. And those are just the taxes on transport that they're imposing. There's plenty of others to go at, and I'm happy to take any interventions if any honourable members like to mention this. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank the right honourable member for allowing me. Is it worth emphasising that the Conservatives froze fuel duty for 14 years, which took £100 billion off the cost of driving? That's tax cuts by us over the last 14 years. In contrast, this government has increased taxes by £66 billion in the last 2 years. It's outrageous, isn't it?
Is quite right, and some of those tax rises are hitting many of the companies who are also going to be hit by these fuel duty rises today. I've spoken to hauliers in my own constituency and across the country, already facing increasing business rates, already facing increasing national insurance costs, and now being hit with a fuel duty rise as well. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
My honourable friend for giving way, and he's giving a great speech, as we always expect from him. Does he remember in the budget in 2024 when the Chancellor then stood there and said that increasing fuel duty would be the wrong choice for working people? And she said then that was because of uncertain global events and that the cost of living remained high. Does he remember anything changing between now and 2024? Because I don't think it's gotten any better. Does he?
I totally agree with the honourable lady. She's absolutely right. And she's a real champion, actually, for the North Sea oil and gas sector, which is largely based in her own constituency as well. So on top of these taxes on rail cards, on ferry prices, on airline business rates, obviously hiking bus fares by 50%, what else are Labour up to? Well, they've been talking about something quite a lot called simpler fares. Now, what they're actually doing is cutting out the cheaper fares preferred by passengers and replacing them with more expensive journeys. In fact, that's been confirmed in a letter to me by the Secretary of State herself, who I notice isn't here today. She says some passengers may pay more under this new structure, but will gain perhaps more flexibility in their return journey. Well, my own constituent, Mr Nottage of Ramsden Bell House near Billericay, has been quite perturbed by having to pay an extra 10%, and he's having to pay an extra £5 a year for his senior rail card as well. Hardly rail prices frozen under Labour, actually rail prices going up on working people right across our country. I give way to the honourable member.
My honourable friend is making a passionate speech about the increase in rail fares for his constituents in Billericay, but he would also be aware for drivers in Billericay, like in the south side in Bexley, have also faced increases in the Dartford bridge charge being hiked by 40% by this Labour government in September, the introduction by Sadiq Khan of the Blackwall Tunnel charge for those trying to cross east to south and likewise the other direction, the expansion of ULEZ for those that need to travel into London, again against the wishes of people in outer London. So does my honourable friend agree that this isn't just the government's tax increases on drivers, but it's also the increase of the Mayor of London on everybody in the outskirts of London that need to travel in and out?
The honourable member makes an incredibly important point. This isn't just about the Labour government, it's also about Labour mayors and Labour councils having their war on motorists up and down the country. And we see it whether it's the DART charge or the ULEZ charge, or the fact that we even saw Zipcar having to cease operations in the UK because of the Mayor of London's extension to electric vehicles of that congestion charge every day. We're actually seeing a reduction in shared transport options under this Labour government and this Labour mayor here in our capital city. And it's an absolute disgrace. I'm sorry, I need to make a tiny little bit more progress, but I'll happily come back to my honourable friend later on. However you travel, Labour are after you. Is it a boat? Is it a train? Is it a plane? No, it's Labour's taxman coming for you. And where will this money be spent? Where will this money be spent, Mr Speaker? All this extra money that we're taxing off the public, not on hard-working families, not to create jobs and boost opportunities, but to fritter away on more welfare, because this Prime Minister and this government front bench are too weak to stand up to their own backbenchers and ensure that welfare is kept under control in this country, picking the pockets of hard-working people to pay for those who choose not to work. And when it comes to paying at the pump, Rachel Reeves has been happy to try and lay the blame at the feet of petrol stations. But what makes up most of the cost of a litre of petrol? Her fuel duty is by far the biggest chunk. In fact, taxes make up 55% of the cost of fuel, and it's going up under Labour. And when the Energy Secretary was presented with these sickening stats, he claimed that's why we've frozen fuel duty. Well, why on earth, therefore, don't they actually do what we did and freeze it all the way through? In fact, they could do it today. They could do it today. They could do it today, but they're not going to do it because they are too afraid of their own backbenchers when it comes to welfare. And I am surprised. I'm surprised that honourable members are aligning themselves with the spluttering spinelessness of Mr Miliband, the honourable member for Doncaster North. We know that for her and Ed, when the facts change, when countries all around the world change, Labour just dig in. Just like with their pathetic...
Sorry, don't worry. Your so-called Rachel Reeves, she's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. If we can stick... And Ed, I don't think is quite the title, and I know you wouldn't want to do that.
Of course not, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Doncaster North should also always, the right honourable member should always get his proper title. But this is very similar, Mr. Speaker, to Labour's pathetic intransigence when it comes to the zero-emission vehicle mandate. They remain entirely aloof, soldiering on whatever the cost is to British companies, to British workers, to British taxpayers. Just like the electric car mandate, the impact on industry, the unions, their own paymasters, for crying out loud, the Financial Times, even the renewables sector. Everyone knows that we've got to have a change to the electric vehicle mandate. Everyone on this side of the House also backs driving forwards with North Sea oil and gas exploration. And what do Labour do? What do Labour do? They just bury their head in the sands and instead turn to taxation in order to pay for their policies. And I give way to the honourable member.
Can you try and make a better effort when you want to get cast? You know, just waving your hand out. You're not a taxi right now. I think, are you giving way to Mr. Stewart? No, you're Graham Stewart. He's giving way to you.
Oh, it's me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Off the chair, it might help.
I don't know whether I'm being picked on or specially stood out, but anyway, I thank you for selecting me. The other aspect which my right honourable friend hasn't turned to today is the fact that the Clean Power 2030, by bringing it forward from 2035, it means that we are overpaying for the renewables. We're locking those overpayments in for 20 years. So as well as the immediate negative impact on our economy and most importantly on our constituents, does my right honourable friend agree that locking in long-term contracts for overpriced renewables is going to put up the cost of living even further?
My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point, and this is one which has actually been raised with me by electric vehicle charge point manufacturers and companies here in the UK. Some of them are literally on the verge of collapse because of that high cost of electricity. So although the government says it's pursuing a green agenda, what it's actually doing is making electricity so expensive that nobody can operate a business in this country without paying such high energy prices that it becomes uneconomical to do so. And he makes an incredibly important point exactly on that point. And I'll give way to the honourable member for a second.
Very grateful. He mentioned his perception of the intransigence of this Labour government, to which I would add brittle hubris in their pursuit of not achieving any form of economic growth. And does he agree with me that the Chancellor would not have to keep dipping the pockets of hard-working people in the midst of a cost of living crisis if she had a clue how to achieve economic growth?
Well, it's not often that I would agree with spokespeople from the SNP, but I very much do so today. I think it's an incredibly important point that the honourable member is making. The Labour Party came to office talking about how growth was their number one priority. Has anybody heard them say that? Has anybody heard the honourable member say that on telly recently? I certainly haven't. It's their talking points has sadly been put to one side, and we can all see why. Because on their watch, growth has totally collapsed. Inflation's gone up, unemployment's gone up, and growth has collapsed on his watch. For all of his highfalutin ideas, the honourable member is part of a government. The honourable member is part of a government that has collapsed growth in this country, and he can't even accept it. No, I've already given way to the honourable member. I've already given way to the honourable member previously. Now, we are all praying for a U-turn on the fuel duty policy on this side of the House. Now, it would be a very welcome one. Now, we'd rather they'd never come up with it in the first place, just like on the previous 16 U-turns we argued against before they did the policy in the first place and then had to U-turn on them. Just like on the family farms tax, where they've partially U-turned, just like on the grooming gangs when they've U-turned, just like on winter fuel, where they've had to U-turn as well. After sticking the boot in, we would really hope that they will think again about this. But I'm not holding much store by that. What's really worrying me and families and up and down the country and members on this side of the House as they go to their constituents who are facing cost of living pressures right across the board. People running businesses really having to make decisions now as to whether they're going to hire that next person or, in many cases, sadly, have to let people go because of the taxes already imposed by this government. This is just another tax on businesses, another tax on pensioners and families up and down the country. They've stuck the... I will give way to the honourable lady.
So much to my honourable friend for giving way. Gosport isn't a rural area, but it is reportedly the largest town in the UK without a railway. So people rely upon their cars to get around. We all know that the Chancellor can't control the events in the Middle East, but government is about making choices. And does my honourable friend agree with me that the choice really here is whether we're going to keep punishing traders who've already had so much punishment from this government, and whether we're going to keep punishing people who don't have a choice about whether or not to use their cars?
I think the Honourable Lady makes a really important point, that this is about choices, but actually she's also right that many people don't have that choice to use their cars, and nobody has a choice as to whether they actually have to go to a shop and buy food, because that's going to be delivered by some form of road transport at some point. So everybody will be paying for Labour's tax, road fuel duty increases. That's what's actually happening in this legislation, which we are opposing today. And I think the Honourable Lady makes a broader point around the choices that this government is choosing to make and who it's choosing to balance the books on the back of. And it's choosing to balance the books on the back of working Britain, on businesses up and down the country. They're facing tax after tax, new bill after new bill, in a relentless pursuit to do our country down and throttle anything that seems to give a half chance of delivering growth, all to pay for a ballooning welfare bill. They would put Dumbo to shame because they haven't got the guts not to reduce welfare, heaven forbid. They don't even have the guts to try and slow the pace in increase in welfare. Mr. Speaker, they voted against we voted against tax hikes in the budget because they're the wrong thing to do for growth in our country, for families in our country. We're voting against it today because in the circumstances now, especially of soaring prices in the international environment, to saddle motorists with an extra hike in their costs of getting around is the wrong thing to do. That is why the Leader of the Opposition tabled our motion before this House. That's why we are urging honourable and right honourable members across this House to say no to Labour's hikes on fuel duty.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call the Minister to move the amendment. Minister Trisamba.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, second time lucky, and I beg to move the amendment in the name of the Prime Minister, and I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for opening today's debate. The Government recognises that fuel costs matter enormously to people right across the country. Fluctuations in pump prices cause fluctuations in working people's bank balances. The effects are real, and the effects, as we've just heard, are widespread. Around 80% of us drive each week. That's why the Government has already taken action to ensure that fuel remains affordable. In November's budget, we extended the temporary 5p per litre cut to fuel duty for a further 5 months. Additionally, we cancelled the inflation-linked increase planned for 26-27. Our fuel duty changes will save the average motorist over £90. In 26-27 alone, a van driver will save an average of £100. I'll make a bit of progress, then I'm sure I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. He's always very enthusiastic and did actually stand up on this occasion. So that is what a learning curve looks like. It's a shame the front bench haven't found one in 14 long years. They're rising to more than £800 for the heavy goods vehicles. It's not the best, there's much more to come. And the sector-specific support continues. I'm enjoying the enthusiasm for the likes of agriculture and horticulture, who retain access to red diesel after it was withdrawn from most sectors in 2022. And our extension of the temporary 5p fuel duty cut includes a proportionate reduction for rebated fuels, including red diesel. Now, the context, of course, I'll make a bit of progress and I will give way. In the context, of course, as the Shadow Secretary of State noted, is what we are now entering the third week of the ongoing conflict in Iran. A conflict whose effects have spread directly across the Middle East and indirectly around the world. And in responding to that conflict and those effects, the Government's priority will always be the national interest. The immediate focus is on protecting British nationals in the region, taking necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies. That is supported not just by the Chancellor's decision to deliver the biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, but to approve access for the Ministry of Defence to the Special Reserve to deploy additional capabilities to the Middle East. I'll give way to the honourable member first and then come straight to him.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. With the Straits of Hormuz effectively closed, does that not prove the point that we have been making for years, which is how important it is to have new licences in the North Sea for our energy security? And can I ask the Minister, since he is known as Torsten Tax, so I'll ask him about tax, does he accept that not having new licences in the North Sea will lose this country billions in tax revenue? Yes or no?
Our position is to deliver a stable transition. That was the position of the party opposite. They are the party that introduced the energy profits levy. The gas and energy from the North Sea, I'll answer the question, will be part of the energy transition in the UK for some decades to come, as several members have mentioned. That's why the Chancellor met with the industry just in recent days. It's why we're setting out proposals to allow tiebacks that will actually help get us gas out of the ground in the near future. Longer-term changes would take significantly longer. But none of what I've heard from honourable members is an excuse for rejecting the tens of billions of pounds of renewable energy investment that is also important to delivering domestic energy security for this country. But I'll give way and then I'll make some more progress.
I like the Minister very much, not least because he represents the Welsh seat of my birth and upbringing. And because I have such respect for him, I'm going to try and make a point to him that I've made so far with zero success to the Chancellor of the Exchequer amongst others. It's all well and good to talk about spending the greatest increase on defence since the end of the Cold War, if you're comparing the post-Cold War period to a period now which is still in a, shall we say, a quiet defence period. But we're not. What we need to spend now is not to be compared with what it was like after the end of the Cold War, but what it was like during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, we regularly spent between 4.5% and 5% of GDP on defence. If he recognises that there's some merit in that argument, could he try and persuade his colleagues to stop making this false comparison?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question and his kind remarks, even if they were driven by geography rather than personality. But I'll take what I can get in today's debate. Since we're in the interests of being kind, I also recognise the point he's making about the significant uncertainty we face in this world today. I think, if I'm honest, I would just say that I'm also just comparing, given that uncertainty always existed to a significant extent, if we are honest, and I think most members on the benches opposite realise that defence cuts year after year in the last decade were a mistake. The honourable member is nodding, so I would also offer that by way of comparison. But let me make some more progress and then I'll take some more. I'll take a few more, make a bit of progress and then take some interventions. As I was just saying, we are providing additional capabilities to the Middle East now, but I want to be clear that the UK will not be drawn into a wider war. We on this side of the House have been clear about our approach. We're in the business of protecting British nationals, not of trying to deliver regime change from the air. We need to de-escalate this conflict, and we are playing our part in doing so. But the full economic impact of the conflict will, of course, depend on its severity and its duration. The recent events have led to significant increases in oil and gas prices. As of this morning, oil prices remain over $100 per barrel and gas prices at 129 pence per therm. And while oil and gas...
Yesterday, the Chancellor congratulated and said that it was great that Norway and Canada were increasing their production of oil and gas, and who could disagree with that, other than seemingly herself and the Cabinet. So does the Minister agree that, on those same lines, we should be increasing our production from the North Sea and we should be lifting the ban on North Sea licences?
As I've said, oil and gas will be with us for some time. That's why the Chancellor... let me finish. That's why the Chancellor met with the sector. But I know, but I hear all the chuntering from members opposite. I did not hear as much chuntering when we saw a 70% fall in jobs on their watch in the North Sea. That is what the truth. That is the truth of what you. That is the truth of what you delivered. And now, on top of that, you're trying to double down. The party opposite are doubling down on opposing investment in renewable energy too, threatening those jobs. So I'm afraid this is a party that believes in energy security, domestic energy security, being delivered by a range of sources, including the nuclear that the party opposite failed to invest in. The honourable member has been very patient.
I am not responsible when they say you, and I wouldn't want that responsibility. Simon Hall.
We see you as responsible for everything, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Minister was right to point out clearly the inflationary cost pressures that Iran is having. He might be reminded that, of course, the announcement that the Chancellor made on the increase in fuel duty predates the Iranian situation. Were it not to have been, And given the impact that we are seeing on, amongst other things, fuel costs from Iran, would he be thinking, and would the Chancellor be thinking, now was a good time to make an announcement about increasing fuel duty? The world has changed. This policy should change as well, surely, to reflect the immediacy of the situation.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question and his invitation to discuss some hypotheticals. But I would just point out that it's only next week that this policy of extending the 5p freeze comes into effect. Fuel duty will be frozen until the end of August this year. That is the position as it is. I understand, and I will come on to later, how we think about the future, because it's a fair question to be asking. But the policy I'm talking about comes into effect exactly next week. I'll let the honourable member come back once, then make a bit of progress.
I'm very grateful to him. There are a huge number of families up and down the country who manage their household budgets incredibly tightly. They will be thinking about, can they afford a holiday this year, etc. Now, I appreciate August does seem a long way away, but many of those people will be sorting out their budgetary plans now. I'm not certain that those just about managing families, as we used to call them, those just about managing households, can wait until August for any clarity or certainty. Don't play cat and mouse with the British people. Take the sensible decision now. Press a pause on that to reflect the dramatic change in circumstances that we're seeing.
Well, I completely agree with the honourable member that families up and down the country are worried about what they're seeing on their TV screens, about the conflict in the Middle East, maybe because they know people directly, but then much more universally about the effect on all of us on their budgets. And they expect a government that takes a sensible approach to that, and they want to see that, meaning that we are protecting household finances, and I'll come on to that, and also making sure that we protect public finances. And that means taking decisions based, recognising the unavoidable uncertainty about how the future of this conflict plays out. That's what I would say to the honourable member about his question. I'm going to make a bit of progress and then I'll give way, because the honourable member has been very patient. And I was just coming on to the fact that we are not in the business of delivering regime change from the air, but we do need to de-escalate this conflict, and we'll play our part in doing that. Yes, thank you very much. Now, oil and gas prices remain below the peaks they reached in 2022 following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I don't want to hide the fact, as we've just discussed, that these are significant increases. Oil is up by 40% and gas prices have risen by around 64% since the end of February. The movements on energy markets we have already seen are likely to put upward pressure on inflation in the coming months, exactly as we've just discussed, but the ultimate size of those effects is highly uncertain. But what is certain is that in the face of them, this government will take the necessary decisions to help protect both household finances and, as I was just saying, public finances. And I think that I want to just make the point that making clear that that is the policy and the approach we are taking does give assurance to households about how will we act, given the very real uncertainty. I'll give way.
To hear, it sounds like that as it's under review, should there be a change, the government would look to support the British public, and I support that point. Is there some kind of framework the government is using to decide this? Is there a trigger point of what fuel prices or how long petrol prices remain at that size? Because actually that helps with the previous question about budgeting. So is the government using some triggers, or is it finger in the air and just wait and see what happens?
I understand why the honourable member is asking that. I would just gently point out that the level of petrol prices today is lower than petrol prices at the time of the election, when the party opposite had a temporary 5p freeze and explicitly did not include continuing that freeze in their manifesto. So I would just offer that. I would offer that by way of indication of where we are today. But let me make some more. Progress. We will keep working towards a swift resolution, one that brings stability back to the region, security to Iran's neighbours and relief to households in the UK, understandably worried about the effect of this conflict. Of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister rightly talks about household budgets, but the other impact, particularly on the gas price, is industrial energy costs in this country, not least for those sectors like the ceramic sector, who are gas dependent rather than electric dependent. Now, when the Chancellor was asked about this in the statement last week on gas prices, she pivoted straight to the British Industrial Competitive Scheme, which is an electrical subsidy. What is coming down the line to help the gas-intensive sectors who currently get no relief anywhere and who are seeing, as the Minister points out, a huge increase in the price per therm, particularly for those sectors now that are looking to renegotiate their long-term contracts?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his point, and I regularly discussed exactly the kind of industries he's raising with us today because he's such a powerful champion on their behalf. Most firms obviously will be significantly more hedged than households against changes in prices, but he's absolutely right to say that the effect of energy price rises is very uneven across our industrial base. He's right to highlight energy-intensive industries. He's right to highlight what this government is doing when it comes to the increase in the discount delivered by the supercharger in just coming months and then BICs in the years ahead. But he's absolutely right to make sure that we do keep concentrating on this issue in the months ahead, and I'm sure I'll be talking to him and others about that. But we do want this war to end as swiftly and quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on, the more dangerous the situation becomes and the greater the impact on the cost of living back here at home. And a rapid de-escalation remains the best way to protect people from further fuel price increases. What I think, despite the bluster today, is the goal of everybody sitting in this House. That requires a return to the diplomatic process. It means the security of vessels passing through the Straits of Hormuz. And on that front, the UK will play its part as the global hub of maritime insurance. But I want to be clear, given some of the things that have been said in recent weeks, that this is a complement. It is not an alternative to physical security of vessels. As the Chancellor said following her call with G7 finance ministers last week, we are supporting a coordinated release of oil reserves, and that has helped to some degree to stabilise international oil markets. We have also asked the Competition and Markets Authority to remain vigilant when it comes to price developments for essentials such as road oil and heating oil. On Friday, the Chancellor and the Energy Secretary met with petrol retailers to make clear that the government will not tolerate anyone exploiting the current situation to make excess profits. Of course.
Can I ask just very quickly what evidence the Chancellor had to suggest that there was profiteering in petrol retailing, because the Petrol Retailers Association rightly took umbrage at the implication of the Chancellor, and I think that didn't go quite the way that she thought it would.
Well, I think this government showing that what it cares about is the living standards of households up and down this country is exactly what we should what we should be doing, and encouraging all retailers to engage in the fuel finder scheme, which I'll come on to a second, is very, very important. And when we come to heating oil, we have heard worrying evidence from people I suspect the honourable member has from his constituents about the behaviour of some suppliers. So that is, well, let me come on to that. So to further support competition in the market, we're introducing the fuel finder to ensure that petrol stations publish their live prices. This will make it easier for drivers to choose the lowest price, and since the beginning of February, all UK petrol stations have been asked to report price changes for petrol and diesel within 30 minutes. Almost 90% of retailers have already registered, and last week officials were instructed to accelerate the integration of fuel finder into major digital map applications. This will make it easier for drivers to use. This sits alongside action to support households who rely on heating oil, as I was just touching on. As the Prime Minister announced earlier this week, the Government will provide an additional £53 million of targeted support for those vulnerable households who would struggle to make an upfront lump sum to top up their tanks. This funding has been... I will.
It sounds as though this is going to be used through the Resilience Fund, which is the replacement for the Household Support Fund. The problem is there are many, many more people who won't fall in that, yet they've seen their heating oil prices double, if not triple, plus doubling of the order amount that they have to make. What support is there for them? Because if it's going from £500 to £1,500 overnight, that's a huge impact, and they won't get the £35 from the government.
The honourable member is right, at least within England. Yes, the funding will be delivered via local authorities, and that means the mechanism that was the Household Support Fund becoming the Crisis and Resilience Fund in a few weeks, and we've made clear, writing to local authorities, that they don't need to wait for the new fund to be in place. They can start making commitments today. The exact decision about who qualifies as vulnerable, is to be made by local authorities, because one of the things that we have learnt is that different parts of the country have different challenges within this issue, and so that will be rightly sitting with local authorities to make the difference. But the money will be allocated. I'll make a bit of progress that I've taken from the honourable member, but that's exactly why the funding will be allocated on the basis of census data, not via usual mechanisms, reflecting the highly uneven geographical spread of heating oil reliance that has rightly been highlighted by lots of honourable members across this House in recent weeks, not least those from Northern Ireland, but also from West Wales. Now, I have today focused on laying out the challenge facing the country and our consistent approach to this conflict. But, Mr. Speaker, this is an opposition day, so it would be rude not to talk a little about the opposition, which means talking about the rank opportunism and incoherence they have displayed. This week, the Leader of the Opposition said, and I quote, she is concerned that there isn't a clear plan behind these strikes. Well, that is the absolute opposite of what she has been saying for weeks. She welcomed the strikes, welcomed military action that she now says lacked a clear plan. She called for Britain to get involved in them, called for Britain to be involved in military action she now admits lacked clear objectives. She says her leadership is about consistency, but the whole country can, on this most important of issues, see that she is just making it up as she goes along. A cavalier attitude with not a second thought about the consequences for households here in the UK. You don't get to wrap yourself up in another country's flag, playing politics with a serious conflict, and then pretend you never did so once the consequences for those living in the United Kingdom become clear. And opportunism is also the word for the opposition on fuel duty too. For all the froth from the Shadow Secretary of State, the truth is the last government didn't budget for any extension of the 5p cut. They said explicitly it was temporary. And on the level of fuel duty, here is the truth. Through the entire 14 years in office, I'm going to come to the 14 years, wait for it, you're going to regret saying that. Through the entire 14 years in office, it was never lower than it is today. In fact, it was higher than it is today for 80% of the time they were in office. Now, I absolutely understand why the Shadow Secretary of State is looking so worked up. Fuel prices matter for everyone, especially those travelling long distance. After all, it's around 270 miles from northwest Durham to Billericay, and once you've found your new constituency, that is. I know it's called a chicken run, but I'm assuming he drove. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the opposition may not be serious, but these are serious times. The cost of living matters. Fuel duty will, in a few weeks' time, be 11 pence lower compared with the plans we inherited from the previous government. Our action on fuel duty will save the average motorist over £90. This is on top of the savings from the government's Fuel Finder scheme. We will, of course, continue to keep fuel duty under close review, but fuel duty is frozen and will remain frozen in the months ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will continue to be responsive to a changing world, to be responsible in the national interest and with the public finances, and to take the necessary decisions to help families with the cost of living. That is this government's promise. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, it was clear that the Minister wasn't giving way.